Welcome to episode 53 of the Access to Inspiration podcast. I'm Sue Stockdale, your host for this series, where you can be inspired by people who may be unlike you. All our guests are amazing, talented, ordinary people whose stories reinforce the characteristics that we want to see more of in the world today: authenticity, generosity of spirit, and humility. Our mission is to inspire change through conversation. And as we've now published over 50 episodes, we want to measure and evaluate the impact of this podcast in society, and would like your help. Please take a moment at the end of the podcast to conduct our 2-minute survey or leave us a voice message to give us your feedback. Details of how to do this are on the show notes and will be provided at the end of the episode and also on our website, accesstoinspiration.org. On with today's episode. My guest today, I hope, will stimulate your curiosity as well as your creativity. Ronald Paredes is a Latin American artist, graphic designer and podcaster from Caracas, Venezuela. Born and raised in a family of painters and designers, he found himself developing a curiosity about what is at the intersection of his three passions: art, graphic design and psychology. Ronald started conducting research about creativity and its connections with psychology, neuroscience and the creative processes, as a way to rediscover our natural creative capacities. When I spoke to him, I learned why sleep and regular breaks are vital to the creative process, and how singing in the street or playing the guitar can contribute to what he calls creative confidence. Welcome, Ronald, to the podcast. Great to have you here.
No, thank you for having me. It's wonderful.
I'm intrigued to find out more about you, and particularly what compelled me to have a conversation with you was this connection between creativity, art, and psychology. So there's plenty for us to speak about today, Ronald. So maybe just tell us, first of all, where you're from and where you're living currently and what you're doing there.
I'm originally from Caracas, Venezuela. I was born there in a family of artists and designers. Interesting story, my dad and my mom, they're both artists. And that's actually how they met. So my dad, he used to be like the boss of a drawing design studio. This was in that time when there was no graphic design. It was called like a commercial drawing. My mom, she was an art student and she was working in this studio. And my dad was her boss.
Oh.
And she tells me that she hated him so much because he was so mean to her. So typically, when the boy likes the girl and he picks on her. So my mom would go back home so frustrated. That man, I hate him so much. Look at what happened.
That's a wonderful story.
Yeah, that's how they met. And they grew up between drawings and oil painting. And my dad used to have a stationery design studio. So I would help him designing logos and stationery, stuff like that. Since I was little, I was doing that.
And did you have a paintbrush in your hand rather than a pen or pencil?
Yes. Whatever I could use to make a mark, I would use it. It's funny. My dad, he was so busy, but when he had some time, he would try to teach me, same with my mom. So it was always there, present, the creativity and the visits to the museum.
So you had the interest in creativity and art and design. And how did you move from Venezuela to where you are now?
Well, funny story. Since I was little, I had a thing for Chinese girls, and I met one, and that brought me here to China. It's been 15 years. I'm no longer in that relationship. I have a son from that first marriage. He's 10 years old now, and I remarried, and now I have another boy, 4 years old. So I have 2 Chinese boys.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Are they creative?
Very much. Well, my oldest son, he likes to draw a lot. And the little one, he likes to draw, but it's very difficult to keep him sitting in a place for more than 5 minutes. It's very naughty.
Drawing and moving.
Yeah. But the little one, he's more into the music thing, singing and dancing and music.
So there's always an element of creativity.
Yes. I try to let them explore. I believe in letting the kids explore and find their own way, their own path. So that's what I try to do with
so
them.
important.
Yes, it's very, very important.
How did you develop an interest in psychology?
I couldn't tell. It was natural. Always, I remember when it was time for me to choose to go to college, I asked my dad because I was between psychology and graphic design. The thing is, at the time, having a career in psychology in my country, it wasn't like very lucrative. And my dad, being a designer himself, an artist, he told me, no, go for graphic design. And actually, what I wanted to do was to study art, but I decided for graphic design because I would get the same resources that I could get in art, but I could get a career in a commercial advertising agency or in a commercial studio. And that's what I did. So I decided for graphic design, but I always had the thing for psychology. So I kept reading and studying and researching on my own.
And what have you discovered? What's the connection in your mind between the two?
Well, started making the connections between creativity and psychology later in my career. I've been doing graphic design for over 22 years. The thing is, we have this label of creativity being an activity for artists, and it's not. Creativity is in absolutely everything. Every single thing that you do, it requires creativity. If you go for science, if you go for accounting, mathematics, my God, mathematics is super creative. And people will say, well, I'm left brained. I operate with order and logic, so I'm not creative. And that is a massive misconception. So I started researching and I found out that it is incredible the amount of research that has been done about creativity and psychology that we don't know, we are not aware of. So it's very, very much linked.
You're even making me think about how I apply creativity to these conversations. And my immediate thought was about where I take the questions and what sparks my imagination from what I'm hearing from the guest. So even in our interaction just now, perhaps we're utilizing creativity.
Yeah, we use creativity every day. What I tell people, if you're capable of understanding a joke or making a joke, you are being creative. So we have to forget that idea that creativity is just for artists and embrace your creativity in other areas. The reason why it is so long, the link, is very, very complicated, the link. When you start in school, primary school, is when we start losing our creativity. When we're in kindergarten, we are free to explore. Well, it also depends on the school and the teacher if it encourages that curiosity. But you are free to explore. But as soon as you start the school, then you have to perform in a certain period of time. We take away something that is very, very important in creativity, that is failure. You're not allowed to fail anymore. So if you're not allowed to fail, you're not allowed to explore. If you're not allowed to explore, you have no time to be curious. And during our education, we don't have time to be curious. We don't have time to explore. You have to perform, and you have to perform well under scrutiny in a certain period of time. If not, you fail. And that start gradually killing your capacity of being creative. So that's when we start losing our creativity. And I found out that when you start developing a language, also you start losing creativity. There is a connection there. When you start developing critical thinking and you start developing this fear of judgment, when you restrain yourself. So basically, the lack of creativity that we suffer is inhibitions. Inhibitions and inhibitions, social inhibitions, religious inhibitions, educational inhibitions. I'm writing a book about it because, for example, when you're sick, you go to the hospital to get diagnosed. And once you get diagnosed, then you can attack the problem. So that's basically what we have. We don't even know these inhibitions exist. And then we cannot free ourselves from those inhibitions.
I think it's a really interesting thread that you're uncovering here, Ronald. And it's making me think about the world that we do live in does very often contain boundaries, time limitations, cost limitations, expectations of society, and so on, as you're saying. Given that we aren't necessarily free to explore in quite the way we would do as a child, how can we still tap into creativity given there are some set of boundaries and limitations?
Well, the first thing that we have to do is identify those inhibitions. What is that is keeping you away from holding that guitar and start, banging those strings or dancing in the street? It is funny because when I was in my country, I used to walk from my home to the advertising agency and I will have my earphones and I will be singing. I'm a horrible singer. My boss told me once, I saw you in the street singing like an insane person. So
he was probably glad you were singing in the street and not in the office.
Yeah. It's this kind of things that we restrain ourselves from doing that it is necessary. So the creativity is there. I always tell people you don't teach creativity. There are so many courses and so many workshops and classes that are going to teach you how to be creative. No, you don't teach creativity. creativity is an innate human capacity. Every single person is creative. So what you have to do is rediscover your ability to be creative. And it's basically getting rid of these inhibitions. I don't like the approach that a lot of people have. For example, there are a lot of creative coaches that they go with the holistic, spiritual approach to develop creativity. And they tell you, well, close your eyes, take a deep breath, and connect with the universe. And yes, that works, but I don't know what I'm doing. What is the process behind that? Why closing my eyes? And let's be honest, that's not something that is for everybody. A lot of people are going to be turned off by that kind of approach. And it makes people think that creativity is only for people connected or with the ability to connect with the universe. There's not an explanation on how you close your eyes, take a deep breath, and connect with the universe. How you do that? What is the process behind? So yes, that works, but there is a reason why that works. And I tell you a small example. When you close your eyes, take a deep breath, and you make silence, like you do in meditation, what you're doing is you're allowing your brain to take a break. So the brain is designed to process information. The more you feed information to the brain and the more you feed them with a stimuli, the brain keeps gathering, and never stop. So the moment you stop, the brain is designed to start processing. And that's what we do when we sleep. So that sentence that we say, I'm going to consult with the pillow, what is happening is that the brain have gathered all this information. And then when you are sleeping, that's the time that the brain have to process. So when you allow those breaks, those moments during the day, you're allowing your brain to process the information, to digest everything that is being gathering. And then you can think clearly. I used to practice meditation, and this teacher, he had this perfect analogy. So imagine that you have a water hose and you put the finger in the mouth of the hose. All the water is going to come out all over the place without any order. So when you liberate the hose, all the water flows freely. So it's basically an analogy for the brain. You keep feeding information, and the brain don't know how to do with all that. The moment you stop and you take a break, that moment start processing everything, and then you start thinking more clear.
The conversation continues in a few seconds after this. If you are a busy person and probably always feeling behind, then you may be wondering how you can get more done in less time. One solution is working with a virtual assistant. They can help with social media, graphic design, customer service, copywriting, digital marketing, and many more tasks. iWorker is a social enterprise that connects you to talented remote workers from countries in crisis. Most of their team come from Venezuela, a country facing dire economic circumstances. By hiring from iWorker, like we do, you'll get back some time for yourself and help to change a life. Find out more by listening to episode 20, where I spoke to co-founder John Miles. Or you can look at their website, iworker.co, to find out more. Now back to the podcast. So you've given us an understanding as to why people might encourage that approach, for example, with creativity. Where my thinking is going, Ronald, is around the importance of safety. My sense is people don't want to let go of their inhibitions because they don't feel safe, or they feel uncomfortable to put that pen to paper because they don't feel confident enough to do so. And I'm also thinking about our purpose of our brain, or at least our primitive brain, is to keep us safe. So I'm wondering where in your research and your thinking safety plays a role.
Well, when you talk about safety in the way that you don't feel that you have a space for you to express yourself freely, to take a canvas and start painting, you have to understand that the things that you do it because it's good for you. I tell my students sometimes, you don't paint because you want to be a painter. You paint because it's good for your brain. You don't play guitar because you want to be a musician and you have to be a musician. You do it because it's good for your brain. It's an exercise that you do, and everything you do is like that. So I'm not going to play ball because I'm not talented and I'm not going to be in the big leagues as an athlete. It doesn't matter. You need to do exercise because it's good for your body and it's good for your brain. And you're going to be the worst player, but you do it because it's necessary for you. It is good for you.
So helping people to see that there's a value, there's a bigger reason for partaking in these activities. It takes me on to thinking about how you then utilize this approach of making a mark on paper and following that to come up with some result. What is it that you use when you're creating something?
I use everything. I try to pay attention to what I have in my surroundings. Another tip that I give to my students is that your brain is like a toolbox. So you need to collect the tools that you might need in the future and you keep them there. Listen all kinds of music and you will be surprised of what you will discover. Go to the movies, go to the opera, read books. That is so much information and you keep it in there. It was great for me to work in advertising because when you work in advertising, you understand how that works. People, the art directors, creative directors in advertising, they understand this very well. You have to fit yourself with everything. Listen to all kinds of music, either you like it or not. So we would listen classical music to the lowest, darkest kind of music possible. And then when you go to produce a campaign or a design, that you will have that reference. And the most wonderful thing is you will be able to connect with any kind of people. You will be able to connect with any kind of socioeconomical status. So that makes you more diverse, creative. But that works the same for everything, not only for advertising, but for everything. If you're going to be an artist, or you're going to be a musician, if you're going to be a teacher, if you're going to be a salesman, to be able to speak the language of the most posh person, as well as the person who have the lowest level of education. And you speak the language, you know the mannerism, and you know how to connect with these people. That is creativity. And that comes from that toolbox. So the more information you gather, the more flexible you are. That's basically what I do with my art. I try to fit myself with as much information as possible. And I have this big bank of reference.
And with that reference, where does environment play a role in expressing that creativity? Does it make a difference for you where you're doing your work?
Very much. Very much. In the podcast, I talk about that. I talk about how much the environment is important for you. I don't know if you will be familiar with the people who are in an office working and they have the pictures of the family and they have a poster they like and they have a plant. That is so important. That is so important because that give you ownership of your space. And when you have ownership of your space, then you have a platform and you're free to express yourself. You're safe. We go back to that safety issue that you were talking about. When you own the space and when you have a control of your own environment, then you feel comfortable and you can express yourself and you have your resources handy. Even when your desk is a mess, which I don't recommend because it's distracting, but for some people, it is good to have the resources at hand. So I have 5 projects going on and I have everything that I need for those projects in my desk. And it works for some people. The environment is very, very important to control, to own your own environment and make an environment where you feel safe to express yourself. You feel comfortable. That will allow you to flow as a creative.
As a great example of that, Ronald, is in these podcast conversations. The listeners may not be aware that we are always able to see one another when we're having the conversation. There's a capacity for video. Some guests prefer to turn their videos off because they say it's distracting to how they're thinking. Others prefer to have it on so they can have that kind of visual connection. So even I experience that in people being comfortable enough in their own environment to have these conversations to be able to express themselves.
Yeah.
So it's a really important point.
Yeah, that's so true. Actually, one of the most famous interviewers in the world from NPR, Terry Gross. She's a very, very famous interviewer. She's been doing it for over 35, 40 years. And all her conversations in her podcast are like that. She's in a studio, in a room in the United States, and she's not in the presence of the interviewee. He's in another place in the other side of the world, and they don't look at each other. They just listen to each other, but that's how they have their conversation. And actually, she talked about that she has a very dark room with a dim light, and that's her environment, and that's how she feels comfortable. And the other person is over there, and they don't look at each other, and it's very effective. It works well for them.
So I'm getting the sense that really any of us, the more we become aware, we discover ourselves, we discover what works for us, the environment that suits us, we discover where we can feel safe enough to actually be creative, is all going to create greater possibilities.
Yes. It is something called a creative confidence. When you discover that you have the ability to do something and you are actually good at it, or not necessarily that you're good at it, but that it makes you feel good, makes you feel good about yourself. It opens a door to a world of possibilities. And then you feel free to explore. It is so sad to see people 35, 40 years old, that I know people like that they tell me, I don't know who I am. I don't know what is my passion. I don't know what to do with my life. When the middle age crisis hits and people, they feel lost because they have been doing something all their life that they don't feel comfortable with, they don't feel happy with, they are not satisfied. And that is terrible because life, we say life is short. I don't believe so, because you can achieve a lot in a few years. But to reach that point when you are lost, that you are like, you don't know what to do. There is this movie that I always reference, is American Beauty, where the protagonist, he discovers himself at 45 years old, and he gets the car that he always wanted, and he gets the job that gives him the freedom to do whatever he wants, do the exercise that he wants, to do the parties that he wants to do, to buy the toys that he wants to enjoy. That is great. But he's forced to go back to real life by the neighbor who wouldn't accept the way that he is. So it is a great analogy. That's why the movie is genius, because it tells you exactly what happens when you try to free yourself and society try to reel you back into reality. But it's that discovery of who you are that is so important, that I encourage people to find. I tell people, don't be scared of being a fool, of being silly, because that's the key. That's where you're going to find what are the things that you enjoy, that you like. It's an awakening.
How do you take your own medicine, so to speak, Ronald? How do you apply that principle, that way of looking at the world, to yourself on an everyday basis?
I live by the principle that I don't care what other people think.
You sing as you're walking along the road.
Yeah, I don't care. I'm 46 years old and I collect my baseball caps and I have my toys, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. You can be a grown up with responsibilities and, enjoy your toys and enjoy your music and enjoy your silliness. Laugh and don't be scared of being silly, because that's very important.
So, with your life's experience to date and all the wonderful insights you've given us about creativity, what do you think your mission is? What do you think is what you're helping other people to learn about?
I would like to help people to rediscover that ability they have to being creative. That's why I'm writing this book, because I want people to understand that there is a process, there is a step-by-step process that you can follow to identify your inhibitions. It's like this. It might sound silly and like a big dream, but I'm convinced actually that people who feel satisfied with themselves and their life are less likely to be angry, to be frustrated. I think that the reason why we have so many issues, so many problems with wars and hatred, is because there is a deep, deep frustration in people. Fear, frustration, that come from your insatisfaction with life, your own insatisfaction. Dissatisfaction is the source of all these problems. People who are satisfied, people who are happy, people who are creating, and they're busy nurturing their own lives and the life of their families, they don't have time for hatred and jealousy and envy and fear. That I'm convinced of that. So I think that's the big purpose, to awake people into take care of yourself, take care of your own life, take care of your own likes and dislikes, and feed yourself, nurture yourself. In my country, they say to people who's always fighting and that you have too much time in your hands to be checking on other people's life and what they're doing. The Karens.
I think in our conversation today, you've given us some wonderful things to think about, to feed our imaginations with, and to reconnect and perhaps rediscover what our creativity is and reflect on what you've said. If people want to find out more about the work that you do and connect with you on social media, how might they do that?
My personal website is mundosanto.com. That is like a Spanish word.
What does it mean in Spanish?
It means holy world. And is based in this idea that everybody is fundamentally a good person, and our devices of the world what makes us corrupt. But I believe that every single person is a good person, is a good, giving, caring, living being. And that's our nature.
Brilliant.
So that's what it means, basically.
Well, it's been a really good conversation I've had with you today, Ronald. I've really enjoyed it. You've certainly stimulated my thinking. We'll put links to your website and your social media contacts on our show notes so people can follow up with you. And I wish you all the best with what you're doing in China.
Thank you so much, Sue. It was a real pleasure talking to you, and I hope we can make it again sometime soon.
Well, I hoped you enjoyed hearing from Ronald Paredes about how he approaches creativity. It certainly made me realise that we all have that capacity inside of us, and it's how we choose to rediscover it for ourselves. It's really important. I wonder what it caused you to reflect on. As I said earlier, we are measuring the impact that our podcast has on society, and we'd love to get your feedback about how it has impacted you. Did it cause you to reflect on how creative you are or take a new action as a result? Please help us by sharing your thoughts about this and all the episodes you've listened to. It will only take you a couple of minutes. You'll be able to find a link in the show notes or on our webpage at accesstoinspiration.org when you find this episode on there. And if you prefer to leave us a voice note, you can do that on the webpage as well. We'd love to hear from you. Let us know also who you might recommend as a future guest or what you love about the show and what we could improve. As always, you can subscribe to our newsletter at the foot of the homepage on accesstoinspiration.org to keep up to date with all the latest news about the podcasts. That's all from us. Until next time, when I will be talking to Christian de la Huerta, who spends his time helping people to free themselves from self-sabotaging a bit. So I hope you can join me then. Bye for now.